All right, hello to everybody filing in. I'm just going to give us a minute or so here to ensure any latecomers are able to join the audio and get themselves settled before we start in with the content today. All right, I think we have enough critical mass to get started, but I'll make sure that I type this all in the chat for anybody that's coming in later. Welcome to today's webinar. It's the final mental health webinar in our 4-part series. So we're glad you could join us on a day where probably many people might need it. Before we hand it off to our presenter and moderator, I just want to cover a few technical details. This is Zoom webinar, which means that your cameras and microphones are disabled by default. So to interact with Sari, our presenter today, you can use either the chat function or the Q&A function. Chat, we're going to ask if she invites any kind of comments or any kind of sharing from you. Go ahead and use the chat. Just make sure that you select all panelists and attendees from the drop-down window if you want everyone to see your message. If you have a question for the presenter today, please use the Q&A. It makes it much easier for us to manage those questions and get through them quickly. Sari's let us know that you can ask questions at any time and we'll address them as they come up. So don't feel the need to delay. So without further ado, I want to hand it off to Katina Barnett-Gallion, our moderator for the day.
Thank you, Michael. Hello, everyone. I'm Katina Barnett-Gallion, ACRO's Director of Communication and Marketing. I would like to welcome you to the last of our mental health webinar series. We know you guys are all busy and probably exhausted from awaiting last night's election results, so we thank you for joining us. As always, we're hopeful that our technology will not fail us. This is a large Zoom, and we at ACRO, like many of you, remain at the mercies of our home Wi-Fi. As Sisson said, you may use the chat freely while on the webinar. If you have any questions for the panelists, please use the Q&A. I will read them aloud to Sari as we proceed. And without further ado, joining me today is Sari Gilman. She will be leading us through watering yourself, allowing your boundaries to take care of you. Sari, feel free to jump in when you're ready.
Okay, hi everyone. I am a marriage and family therapist for 35 years, and I have been teaching on boundaries, self-care, and compassion and overwhelm recovery since 2012. And I have a couple books on the subject. So I'm very honored to be with you today and to share what it is to really be an ambassador for self-care, compassion, and boundaries. This morning, I woke up in the same country that I was in yesterday, basically. And I really needed to do some yoga this morning. I'm not really great at yoga. I'm not a very experienced yoga practitioner, but I found it really helpful to work on my breathing. And so it's really important to kind of tune into what it is that you need and continue to ask yourself as we go into looking at self-care and boundary work, what is it that you need? And to be able to offer that to yourself. Next slide. So I want to open with a couple words from Cynthia Ocelli. I love this piece. It's called Mantra for New Beginnings. For a seed, as in S-E-E-D, a seed, for a seed to achieve its greatest expression, it must come completely undone. The shell cracks, its insides come out, and everything changes. To someone who doesn't understand growth, it would look like complete destruction. So I will carry those words with me through the days ahead to come. as things may look like complete destruction, and remind myself that our country is going through deep transformation in these times, and that work of transformation will be continuing. I'm hearing a little noise in the background, so someone may want to mute themselves. Check your mute to make sure. Yeah. Okay. Are we getting that? Okay. Let's go to the next slide. So we're going to start with a little bit about self-compassion. And self-compassion has three components to it. It's one of the easiest things you can do to offer yourself, no matter what it is that you're feeling. But when you're feeling upset or distressed, this is kind of the first thing to reach for, even before self-care. Reach for some self-compassion. Next slide. So here's the three parts. The first part is feel what you feel. It's that simple. Allow yourself to know what it is that you're feeling. Like when I woke up this morning and I knew that I was feeling tightness in my chest. It was just acknowledging that I knew what I was feeling, and be understanding with yourself around what you're feeling. Our feelings just want to be understood and acknowledged by us. So it's not about changing your feeling, it's about knowing your feeling, and about practicing not being harsh or critical or judgmental around what it is that you're feeling. Just knowing, this is what I'm feeling. Next slide. The second part is because self-compassion has three parts. So the first part is feel what you're feeling. The second part is recognize common humanity. Just ask yourself, is this something that other people would be feeling in this situation? And then acknowledge this is just part of the human struggle. This is a normal thing to be feeling. This is a normal thing to be going through. And what we're doing is we're just acknowledging that we're not alone in the struggle, that whatever we're feeling, whatever is going into our lives right now and going on in our lives is part of the human journey. And that is just a part of what we're all experiencing. Next slide. And the third step is to be kind to you. Take care of your feeling. So now that we know that what you're feeling, and you've honored that this might be part of common humanity, the third part of self-compassion is just being kind to yourself. That's where I got up and said, I'm going to do some yoga on YouTube this morning to help my breath. I'm just going to be kind to me. When we consistently give ourselves nurturance and understanding, we come to feel worthy of care. When we wrap ourselves in the warm embrace of self-kindness, we feel safe and secure. And there is someone that we can count on to be present for ourselves, and that's us. So take those three steps and apply them to any moment throughout your day. I wake up every morning since the pandemic started, and I put my hand over my heart. And I say to myself, I don't know what you're going to see today. I don't know what you're going to experience. I don't know what's going to happen on the news. But I've got you. I'm with you. No matter what happens, I've got your back. And that has just been helping to give myself a sense of safety and security in a time when many of us aren't feeling safe or secure. Emotional balance is really essential to develop, as many of you may be feeling overwhelmed. So the self-care, self-compassion, and boundaries are all to help you reduce that feeling of overwhelm. So take any part of what I share with you today and just use it as best that you can. I want to give a little bit of warning about self-compassion. It's such a simple practice, but it is a practice. You get better at it as you do it. there is research that shows that if you've had a history of parental abuse, self-compassion can actually be frightening and overwhelming. And so what I want you to do, if you've had that in your history, is just to visualize a safe place and see yourself in that safe place, and start with visualizing being in a comforting place. And that may be more helpful to you. Start with soothing images. Okay, next slide. So if you have a pen and paper handy, we're going to start with making a self-care wheel today so that you have a couple things that you can just leave and again take with you and start using right away. When people come to see me for therapy, I often get to talk with them about parts of them that are suffering, and the parts that have become depressed or anxious. Without self-care, we lose touch with parts of who we are and what we need to thrive. And I promise you, there is always someone who needs you in every single way, and sometimes even in emergencies in a critical way, but that never means that you don't need you. You always need you. And when you're not able to do self-care, what your soul inside ends up hearing is, hush up, be quiet, go wait for me in the corner. Somebody else's needs are much more important and I don't have time for you. And when we do that to our souls, you get symptoms and you get headaches, back pain, depression, anxiety, locked jaw. I myself, I get a neck pain where I literally, if I've been ignoring myself, I literally cannot turn my head. It's a little embarrassing because I'll be talking to someone and I'm having to move like this. But it could take like 4 days for that to release. But it's a signal to me that I have not been attending to myself the way that I need. And so when your body is giving you pain, I really want you to think of it as it's just a signal. Your body is trying to get you to pay attention and trying to get you to do some self-care. But sometimes people aren't really sure about what they could be doing for their self-care. So I'd like to start with making a little bit of a map for you. So you take a piece of paper and you just make a circle on it. This is a very fancy circle that I have up there. You make a circle and divide it into 6 pieces like you would a pizza pie. So divide it in half, then divide it in a quarter, and then make it into 6 slices. And I want you to think of your self-care as having at least 6 components to it. Next slide. And the first component that everybody needs on their self-care wheel is foundation. So go ahead and write foundation in one of your 6 parts. And foundation of self-care is your eating, sleeping, and exercise. So put that all inside of foundation. And whenever you feel lost or overwhelmed, or you can't sleep, or you're eating crappy food, go back to your foundation. Your self-care is not some linear thing where you're always getting better and better at it. There are times when all of us have to just come back to the foundation of self-care and work there. And even though I teach this stuff, there are times when, if I notice my sleep is off, then I bring myself back to foundation work and just bring myself back to getting some good rest. So none of us function well when our foundation is off. And foundation may be where you put all of your attention right now, and that's totally fine. Next slide. You may have a lot of work to do on your foundation, but you can do it whenever you need to, and you can come back to it whenever you see yourself slipping. The next part of your wheel, write down small pleasures in one of your pieces of pie. Small pleasures is something that you enjoy doing that is right within reach of your hands. This is not something where you have to take a vacation to be able to get the pleasure from the thing that you enjoy doing. It's something that you can do in 5 minutes. It's something that you can reach for. For me, it's knitting, and I'll just stuff a little thing of yarn with me and needles wherever I go, and I can just do a few lines of that and then stop, but it gives me a small pleasure. And so yours might be reading. Sometimes I've worked with nurses in a hospital and I've said, just bring like a junk, trashy novel that you enjoy, go into the stairwell, open up, or even in a bathroom stall, and open up your book for 5 minutes and just drop into a small pleasure. So go ahead and write down what some of your small pleasures are and pop those into the chat so we can hear what some of those are, because I'm sure most of you are not knitters, but I do want to hear what some of your small pleasures are.
We have reading, running, walking, making bracelets, listening to music, warm cup of tea, Netflix, jigsaw puzzles, taking pictures, nature walks, painting, playing games on the phone, snuggling with the cats.
Great.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. These are wonderful. I want you to hear them all. And if you want, look in the chat to get ideas. If maybe you're somebody listening and going, gee, I don't really have any small pleasures, check out the chat and try out some of those and ask yourself, maybe there's something that you want to learn or something that you're curious about. You can keep growing your small pleasures. Next slide. This one's a little more challenging these days. Social. So there's been research by Gallup. I found this absolutely fascinating, that human beings thrive better if we have 6 hours a day of quality social contact. I know all the introverts are like flipping out right now going, no, but 6 hours a day of quality social contact. So I think of that as a challenge in my mind. And as a therapist and someone who teaches a lot, doing workshops and trainings, a lot of my time has been spent working. And I take this research as a challenge for me in my life to make sure that every week I'm really checked in with high levels of social engagement, not necessarily 6 hours a day. I do love my clients, so I feel like that is social contact, but it's not an even exchange, right? I'm their therapist, so they're not there to be my friend per se. So it's not the same as being in a balanced relationship. But I take this as a challenge and I make sure that every single week I am checked in with my friends. I am either taking a walk with a friend or I am getting on Zoom with a friend and connecting, and I'm actually painting with one of my girlfriends where we're both doing watercolor online together once a week for an hour. She paints whatever she wants. I make sure that I see my family and spend quality time. So even during the pandemic, I've just kind of switched where I do the social contact, but none of us can really afford to completely drop our social contact. So fill in your social zone. Like, is this an area that needs improvement for you? Are you staying connected to the people that you need some contact with? Or is this an area that needs a little development for you? Next slide. Creative. So this is, where you think of the things that you do for creativity. I play guitar, I write songs, I do haiku, and I write. And now I paint. So I have like all these creative things. Actually, I would rather spend like lots of my time doing creative things. So my creative zone in my self-care wheel is always, that part is always going fairly well for me, because I really put attention to those things. But just notice, are you needing more time with some of the things that you find creative outlets for you? And write down what some of your creative outlets are. And go ahead and throw some of those in the chat too. I'd love to hear what some of you are doing for creativity.
Making cards, playing the piano poorly, sewing, quilting, photography again, dancing, writing short stories and singing. This is a creative bunch. Sewing.
Great. Okay, so this is wonderful. So you're getting a sense that there's lots of things that you can do in the creative zone that you already have going. And this is an area where you can also keep adding to it, because sometimes when we're having a difficult time doing our self-care, you may notice that sometimes you lose interest in some of your creative pleasures, especially if you've had a loss or a death. You may notice that it's really hard to bring yourself to do that creative thing that you used to do. And it's okay to move on to something else that feels more doable for you. So just notice that sometimes that's harder when we're grieving. Next slide, spiritual. Some of you may want to put this in your self-care wheel if you feel connected spiritually and that's important to you, but I leave that as optional. And some people have a strong spiritual life, and others, that's not really how they want to connect, and that's okay. I connect spiritually by walking outside in the woods and kayaking. Next. And everybody needs emotions, understanding your feelings. That needs to be part of your self-care. Going back to that practice that I opened with on self-compassion, another way that you can work with your feelings and just understanding them. We're not changing your feelings, we're just recognizing them. We're feeling beings, we have feelings all the time. Another practice that I do for that is morning journaling. And so I do that as soon as I open my eyes. Before I even go to the bathroom, I open up my journal and I just write a couple words about what I'm feeling. But you can use a journal to go to whenever you want. I always have a little journal in my purse that goes with me wherever I go in case I want to jot something down. And your feelings just want to be understood. So there's nothing you need to change about them. But think about, are you taking time throughout the day to just notice what you're feeling? Just ask yourself, what am I feeling right now? We are feeling beings. Our whole human system is made up to feel. So you'll be feeling things all the time, unless you're numbing. And we're going to get to that later. Okay, next slide. If you are in recovery for something like drugs or alcohol or a physical injury or a health condition, that's me in my pink tutu in a hospital when I broke my hip 1.5 years ago. When you're in recovery, a lot of your self-care has to get refocused around healing and recovery. And so when I broke my hip, I had to do a lot of physical therapy and I had to do other things that were part of my recovery. So when you're in an injury, your self-care wheel should change to deal with recovery. And if you are recovering from drugs or alcohol, you need to put a lot more time into your self-care, being focused on your recovery. So you decide if that's something that needs to be in your wheel right now because you're in recovery, or if you don't have anything going on in your life that you need recovery for. So let's talk a little bit about boundaries. And I understand that y'all had a little bit of training on this. Boundaries is something that I really teach on, but before I open to that slide, I just really want to talk about a few more things about self-care before we move on. So what I want you to know is research shows that if you do 15 minutes a day of self-care, something on your wheel, 15 minutes a day, you will reach a tipping point and you will go further. So for those of you listening whose self-care has just gone to the wayside and you don't really have much of a self-care practice in any of those zones, I just want you to begin in one area of that pie for 15 minutes a day. And you will build up from there. So it's not something that you need to spend hours on every single day. But those of us who love doing self-care definitely spend more than 15 minutes a day on it. But you'll get a good start out of it by doing that. Okay, so I want to go over my definition of boundaries. I keep things very simple when I talk about boundaries. Boundaries are just made of yeses and nos. All of us are born with a compass inside of us. And this compass is like your guidance system for life. And inside of that compass are just two words, yes and no. And you can see that in babies all around the world, in any culture, that they have a sense of what's a yes and what's a no for them. And so I believe that we're actually born with this. And as we go through life, it gets sometimes harder and harder to tune into our yes and no. And sometimes we are walking around with a clouded over compass where we keep saying, I don't know. I don't know what I want to do. I don't know how to get through this next piece. And so our compass can get clouded over. So as I talk about boundaries, I really focus on your ability to hear your yes and no. And honestly, since I'm a psychotherapist, I don't sit across from people and know exactly what they need in their lives. That would be crazy. How would I know that for complete strangers? What I do is I tune into people's compasses. So when somebody's coming in and sitting across from me, I'm just tuning into what are they saying about their yes and no? What's really a yes for them? What's really a no for them? And then my job is to help them hear that and help them trust that. And so I rely on this compass because I believe it's your guidance system for getting through life. And I believe that it has all of your wisdom there and that you can trust it. Does it mean that everything will work out perfectly? No. Does it mean that sometimes you say yes to something and then you want to say no to it? Yeah. Things change. This compass is a pretty sensitive instrument inside of you, and it adapts and it is sensitive to different circumstances and different relationships in your life and different things happening in the community and the culture around you. And so it keeps changing and adapting, and I want you to be able to tune into it. Okay, next slide. So there's a couple of basic things that I think of around boundaries that I want you to have as your basic understanding of boundaries. Your boundaries actually have one job, and that is to take care of you. Your boundaries are not here to please other people. Every relationship has boundaries. Every single relationship. There is no relationship in your life that doesn't have boundaries. And boundary setting is normal. And some situations feel more emotional than others when you go to set boundaries. Not all boundaries are the same size. So sometimes we're dealing with extreme boundary challenges. And there's different skills that you use for extreme boundary challenges than that you use for other kinds of challenges. Now, right now, the place that we're all in the country, in the United States, is we are all in extreme boundary challenges. All of us are feeling our boundaries pushed on in some way or another. And in those extreme challenges, it helps to have a couple of very specific boundary skills. But before you deal with extreme challenges, you need to have the skills that come underneath that. Go ahead to the next slide. So self-awareness is what's required for boundary awareness. And that self-awareness that you have comes from just paying attention to that compass. So when I say boundary awareness, what I mean is just paying attention to what's really a yes for you and what's really a no for you. And as you practice just being aware, what's a yes, what's a no, what am I really feeling about that? What's my compass really telling me? That's where we get our boundary awareness. So I consider boundaries an awareness practice. You're going to use your boundaries your entire life. You're going to use them in every relationship that you have. It is worth it to kind of put the time in around your boundaries. Next slide. What I've noticed and kind of what my work is all about is about understanding these 7 patterns. And no matter where you grow up in the world, and no matter what culture you grow up in our country, we adopt a certain pattern and we tell stories about our lives through these 7 patterns. And you too will see yourself in one of these 7 patterns. You might see yourself in more than one, and that is completely normal. So I want to go through these patterns. Now, certain cultures favor some of these patterns way more than others. And certain cultures kind of favor some of these patterns for certain genders more than others. And so you'll see that. But not all 7 appear in every single culture. But you have to figure out which of these patterns you happen to adopt along the way. I adopted the workaholic caretaker pattern. That's 2 of them. So workaholic, I don't feel like I need to explain. I'm sure you understand what that is. But the short note is you turn everything into work and you're always really busy, super busy. You could be in the workaholic pattern. The caretaker pattern is you feel responsible for everyone and you feel responsible to take care of everyone. Even people that are actually capable of taking care of themselves, people that are caretakers tend to zoom in and take care of people even though they really could be taking care of themselves. And caretakers notice they have a lot of people leaning on them in their lives. You have a lot of responsibilities. Now, some of you may have real caretaking responsibilities in your life. And so I'm talking about people that are actually doing caretaking, not where they're needed, but are overloading themselves with extra responsibilities. And of course, when we're doing these things, we have trouble with our boundaries. These patterns all relate to your boundaries. Because when you're doing the caretaker pattern, it starts to get difficult to take care of yourself. There's no time, there's no space, and you're too exhausted. Same thing happens with workaholic pattern. Yeah, you wanted to do your own exercise and do things for you and have time for creativity, but you're too busy working. And so we don't necessarily get to our self-care. We struggle with boundaries around these 7 patterns. So if you're going to do some boundary development, the first place where you do it is around these patterns. Protector pattern is someone that covers for other people. You may even find yourself lying for other people, and you've adopted the protector pattern, where you think it's your job to protect others from knowing the truth. We've seen that a lot in our country lately. Then there's the sacrificer pattern. Sacrificers are when you really believe that someone else's needs are so important that you will sacrifice yourself for them. You will work and work and work to put somebody else through law school. You will, and then say, you wanted to go to law school too, but you're making the sacrifice now for them in the hopes that one day they'll make it for you. But sacrificers often end up getting depleted because they're giving away what they need for themselves. And so it's hard to fill your own tank when you're a sacrificer because you've given away everything that you've needed. Lovers are people who love and love and love, and they never feel loved in return. They're wondering how this happens, but they end up always being the giver in the relationship and never the receiver. Isolators are people who sometimes like to be alone a lot. Like they say that that's their preferred mode, is to isolate and be more alone. But the truth is that after a while they get lonely, and then they don't have anyone they can reach out to because they've isolated so much that there's nobody there on the other end. And numbers are people that use drugs, alcohol, shopping, spending money, whatever it takes to just not feel. Netflix, on and on and on. And those, a little bit of numbing is good for all of us, you know, taking some of that edge off and giving ourselves a break. But when I talk about the number pattern, I'm talking about people that spend all of their time numbing to the point where everyone around them is like, hey, are you even in the room? Can you please put the phone down? Can you please just have dinner uninterrupted? Like people around you are pointing out that the numbing that you're doing is a problem. Or you may have such debt accumulated because you've been numbing by shopping and spending more than you can afford. So I want you to look at these patterns, figure out, well, which one of these am I using? If you're using more than one, like I said, I was a workaholic caretaker. I've completely recovered from caretaking, and yet I still do the job that many caretakers do as a therapist. But I'm able to do it without going into the caretaker mode. I'm able to do it with some boundaries and some self-care. So it's not that you're going to get rid of these patterns, but what I want you to focus on is how you bring balance to these patterns for you, because that's where your boundary work is. And that's where your self-care is. The problem with a lot of self-care things that I read online is it's not tied to these patterns. So if I'm a workaholic, my self-care needs to bring my workaholism into balance. And in order to do that, I need more rest. So I'm going to give you what the opposite of all these patterns are, because that's how you begin to practice your own recovery from these patterns and how you bring them into balance. And those things need to be part of your self-care routine, or your self-care never really matches your pattern. My knitting doesn't save me from being a workaholic. In fact, I once turned all of my knitting into a workaholic problem one year when I decided I was going to make mittens for some fundraiser for a nonprofit. And I ended up staying up all through Christmas, all through the night, making all of these mittens that were going to be sold in this store. And it was like, oh, workaholism on fire. So I took my creativity and I turned it into work, which that's why I want you to be aware of your patterns. So here's the way to recovery. You start by doing the opposite. That needs to be part of your self-care. So for workaholics, the opposite is rest. It's not play, by the way. Workaholics turn play into a job. For caretakers, lovers, and sacrificers, all three of those, the opposite is doing things that nurture you. They can be really small things. But in all three of those patterns, the focus is so much on nurturing others that you never really nurture yourself. So you begin by nurturing you. For the protector pattern, it's finding someone to tell the truth to. Protectors end up in relationships where friends say, oh my God, I never knew that was going on in their lives. Because you never knew the truth, because protectors hide the truth so that nobody can see what's going on in their lives. So protectors need somebody to be truthful with. It can start with a journal. You can just be telling your truth in your journal for yourself. Or it can be going to a counselor, or it can be picking one friend that you just open up and just let them know what's really going on in your life. For isolators, it's joining something where somebody else has the whole plan sort of organized for you. Because when you're isolating, it's hard to reach out to your friends because a lot of your friends will be like, hey, where have you been? I've been texting you. I've sent you emails. I haven't heard back. And they stop responding to you after a while. So it can be hard to rebuild a connection if you're an isolator. So if you're feeling lonely, I want you to find something where you can join online, something that you're interested in, and sign up for that thing, because then you'll meet other people that have interests. Obviously, when the pandemic is over, it'll be easier to step out of those isolations. So it's going to take a little more effort to do it online, and it might not be as satisfying, but it'll be a good first step. For numbers, it's allowing yourself to feel. So the thing about numbing is that you're always trying not to feel. And we go back to what I said earlier about our feel. We need to be feeling beings. So for numbers, it is stepping into activities that just involve your five senses. It could be cooking, it could be taking a walk, it could be going to the beach, but something where your five senses are really hit. Bicycle riding, those are really good for numbers. It's not more Netflix. Okay, next slide. So just remember, your boundaries have one job, and that is to take care of you. Your boundaries are not like spandex. They can't stretch and take care of everybody else. Sure, if we have kids, we're taking care of them, but our boundaries cannot stretch over to all the other people in our life and be used to take care of everybody else. Your boundaries kind of just custom fit for you. Next slide. So if you are interested in boundary development and you really want to become a boundaries expert, here's a couple of ways you can get started on that. And I want to be honest and tell you that it takes about 2 years to become a boundaries expert in your own life. So if you have been saying to yourself, you know, I really need to work on my boundaries and I really want to work on my self-care, recognize that you're going to start seeing progress immediately in those 2 years, but that once you get to sort of the 2-year point, you're going to be sending me emails saying, oh my God, sorry, my whole life has changed, because you're walking around with that thing called boundary awareness all the time, which is how I walk around. I realize that I always need to be paying attention to my boundaries. So if you're going to become a boundaries expert, you're going to be speaking the truth, and get used to saying things that may be uncomfortable for you to say, but they are true for you. And this is not about laying judgments on other people, but it is about speaking up and about just speaking your truth. Next slide. Another thing that boundaries experts do is they listen to the signals that they get from their compass. So if you're not sleeping and you're drinking and you have high risk behavior, or you're feeling lots of depression and anxiety, you know, depression and anxiety can come from other things, but it can also come from not listening to your compass. So I always check in with, are you really listening to your real yes and no? So when you're becoming a boundaries expert, you're really paying attention to these signals and you're saying, whoa, what's going on with me? What do I really want to say no to here? Where do I feel overextended? Next slide. And when you're a boundaries expert, you're able to talk about your fears, because all of us have deep fear around speaking our truth and around clarifying our boundaries. And when we need to do it, it means that we are also willing to be with whatever it is that we're afraid of. My deepest fear is disappointing people. So my way of dealing with that, when I want to say no to something or to someone, I just did that the other day. I just said, I know this is going to be disappointing, but I'm not able to participate in that project. So I call out my fear. My fear is disappointment. It's not going to be your fear. You've got your own. But I want you to have a way to speak your fear out loud when you're needing to establish your boundary. You can say to someone, you know, I'm afraid that you won't like me if I tell you this truth, but I need to put the truth on the table because our relationship deserves that. So there's lots of ways that you get used to walking into your fear, but when you become a boundaries expert, you understand that you have to give voice to your fears in order to set your boundaries. Next slide. The other thing that you work on when you are becoming a boundaries expert in your life is you work on clear contracts with everyone. So when you have clear agreements and clear contracts in your personal life, in your professional life, you know, things are really understood. There's clarity. They may even be in writing. You know what you're getting paid. You know when you're getting paid. You respond to people on time. They know what they can expect from you. And especially these days with the pandemic, you know, bringing a lot more clarity to communications is actually very helpful for everyone because things get confusing because we're so overwhelmed internally. People are making lots of mistakes, and that's really normal because everybody's so overwhelmed. But you have to bring some clarity to people around you, and it helps to be just responsive to people in a really timely way. When things are unclear, you feel taken advantage of. You don't remember agreeing to what's actually happening in your life. You're like, how did I end up covering for Mike when he left the job? Like, I don't even remember agreeing to this, but now I'm suddenly doing two people's jobs. You thought that the other person would do something in a certain way and then they didn't, and you feel stuck. And so if you're feeling any of those feelings in any relationship, work or at home, it's really important to then go back and say, hey, you know, I think we have an unclear agreement, or I'm really unclear about how our agreement works. And I want to bring some clarity to this. And you want to move things from the unclear zone to the clear zone, because things can always get moved into those murky situations. And especially during the pandemic, when people are often doing so many things at the same time, it can be really hard to figure out, do we have clarity around this boundary, or did the boundary just get moved on me? So keep working on clarity, and that helps you with boundaries expertise because you get a lot of practice bringing clarity to things. Next slide. The other thing that you work on when you're a boundaries expert is you stop saying you don't have time. When you're a boundaries expert, you're really careful about your time. Time management is something that you pay lots of attention to. And you realize that how you use your time really matters, and that there are things that maybe you've been unrealistic with yourself about, especially if you're in that workaholic zone or caretaker zone, or sacrificer. You may find that you are unrealistic with how many hours there are in a day and how much you can actually ask of yourself. And it's okay if you're working on boundaries to work on clarity about your time and look at your schedule, reschedule things if you need to, and create a little more room for you. Sometimes people are running from things back to back to back, and they don't even get a bathroom break. I worked with some teachers once where one of the teachers ended up on a catheter because he wasn't taking bathroom breaks. What a horrible thing to have happen, because he thought it was more important to spend every hour helping his students and doing office hours, and he didn't know how to just get up and say, I just need to go to the bathroom. So recognize when you're overloading yourself and you're being unreasonable with yourself. That is the task when you're becoming a boundaries expert, is you look with compassion at your limits, with kindness at what you're asking of yourself and what's unreasonable. And you start moving into being more reasonable with yourself. Next slide. Boundaries experts aren't only focused on yourself. So I should be very clear about this. Boundaries experts are very interested in the boundaries of other people. And we respect the boundaries of other people, and we ask about your boundaries. I'm someone that teaches about the subject of boundaries. I don't expect everyone to be a boundaries expert that I interact with, But I do expect myself to ask people, what's a yes for you? What's a no for you when we work together? So I understand what the clarity of the contract is and that I want to be respectful of your boundaries. So I don't wait for people to tell me they have a boundary. I want a win-win situation. And since I work on boundaries expertise, I take responsibility for that by asking people around me, hey, what's a yes for you? What's a no for you? What's the best way to communicate? What's the best day for you? And let's try to make that work for you as well. And what do you need from me? And what kind of timing do you need that in? And that way we have conversations about boundaries. Same is true in my relationships outside of work. I want clarity in my relationships. What's okay for you? What's not? I need to know that information. Next slide. Experts can also navigate really tricky situations where the boundaries are a mess. And what I mean by that is I'm sure some of you are working in situations where there's power issues, there's gossip, there's high drama. Those are situations where you just want to leave the job. And you might feel like you're getting pulled into a riptide. And I've worked in those kinds of situations, in those kinds of organizations. But since I have some really solid sense of my boundaries, I'm able to navigate in those situations without getting pulled into the mess because I bring some clarity and I watch my boundaries carefully to not get sucked into the gossiping, the overstepping, the power issues, and I stay out of the messy situation by setting my boundaries. So, I was once working in a school as a counselor to the kids, and the principal called me in and said, hey, can you sit in on this teacher's math class and just watch her and let me know if you think she has like some mental health issues going on? Well, first of all, that's not my job in the school. I'm here to work with the kids. And so I said, that would not be okay. That's not an okay thing for me to overstep, nor to advise you on. You're going to have to find a different way to get that sort of information. I'm here to work only with the students as their counselor. And so I brought boundaries and clarity in what would have been such a dramatic, messy situation. So you have to pay attention to this because sometimes you get asked to do things that may feel flattering, but may also be terrible in terms of boundaries. Next slide. So where will you begin? I've just laid all this stuff on you, okay? You can begin with any of these. If you feel like, wow, what I really need is to pay attention to my self-care, I want you to understand all boundary development begins with self-care, all of it. So if you need more spaces on your wheel filled out, and you realize you need more nurturing and more self-care based on the 7 patterns, then you begin there. If you saw those 7 patterns and you're like, oh my gosh, I'm using 4 or 5 of these, you just begin by doing your recovery 1 pattern at a time. This is why I say it takes like 2 years. You just start working 1 at a time. And when it comes to the expertise, you look at speaking your truth, knowing your fear, creating clear contracts, stop saying you don't have time, ask others about their boundaries, and deal with really tricky situations. Next slide. I'll skip this one. We can skip this one. If you need more from me, wait, back up. If you need more from me, I have books available. One is Transform Your Boundaries. There's journal questions at the end of each chapter to help you dig out your boundaries. I also have a book, Naming and Taming Overwhelm. Next slide. And then I have my most recent one is The Mystery of Knowing Journal. This is for people that hate journaling or people that love journaling, but it is journaling about your self-care and your boundaries. It's the entire book. Next slide. And if you want to take any of my online courses to go deeper, I know we've only had an hour today. I do have deep online classes that are pre-recorded that you can do at your own time. You can use Friends of Sari. to get a discount on the Transform Your Boundary course, just that one that has everything inside of it. That if you're going to dive into boundary work and self-care and you feel like you need a lot more than what we covered today, check out the Transform Your Boundary class. Next slide. I love these words from Audre Lorde. Caring for myself is not self-indulgence, it is self-preservation, and that is an act of political warfare. Now, I know her context and her time was different than these times now, but I think her words are so important for all of us and so relevant. So please take good care of you and take your self-care and self-preservation very seriously. Next slide. Thank you. Here's my website. You're also welcome to email me. My email is everywhere on my website, and you can reach out and ask questions. I'm happy to answer. Quintina?
I thank you so much, Sarah. Yes, as she just said, we have a few minutes left, but if you do have some lingering questions, do feel free to drop them in the Q&A. I'll be happy to read them out for you.
Oh, I'd love to hear some questions. I know that was a lot, right? All at once.
Much needed. Well, it doesn't look like, much is coming. So I want to thank you very, very much, Sarah, for joining us, especially today. You guys, this mental health webinar series came together in response to noted needs of our members. You guys were letting us know that you are stressed. And so we encourage you to lean on ACRO, which is really to say to lean on each other. You, our members, are ACRO. We've launched this webinar series, which you can access the recordings online. We also launched the caucus gatherings. Those are on the second Tuesday of the month and open to all caucus members. We also have our ACRO collective gathering open to all members on the third Thursday of the month. These are unstructured Zooms for you to access each other and really just for you to lean on your network. You can find more information on those on the ACRO calendar, which is www.acro.org/calendar. And with that, I hope you guys have a peaceful rest of the week.
Can we check if there's any questions here? Okay,
Yeah.
Somebody wrote something about clear contracts summarized. I'm not sure what that.
Yeah, if you could clarify, would you like me to go back to that slide?
Yeah.
Oh, no, I have it memorized. Go ahead. But what's the question?
It just says clear contracts.
Oh, maybe go back to that slide for that person so they have it. But what I want you to think about is the kinds of agreements that you have in your life. Think of everything, every agreement you make as a contract. And that, there you go.
Yeah.
And that we have clear contracts with people or we have unclear contracts with people. And when things are unclear, you do feel taken advantage of and you feel kind of stuck and you don't remember making these agreements. Like somebody else is sort of moving the line around and everything is getting foggy and you're not really sure. That means there's a lack of clarity. And so the way to handle that is to work with boundaries and bring in clarity and saying, you know, this is all really unclear. I would like to get some clarity around what date are we doing this by? I feel like there's too many surprises. I don't remember saying that I would do this, but somehow this has ended up on my desk. Can we talk about this? Because now there may be too many priorities on my desk and we may need to reshuffle this agreement so that we make it make sense. There's very kind ways to talk about your boundaries without needing to start arguments with people, but to bring people into understanding that, oh, this is really unclear and we need to bring clarity. Most people are avoiding the clarity, and as a result, people are feeling really taken advantage of. They're not intending to do that usually, so it helps when we bring attention to that and go, I know this isn't your intention, but things are getting really unclear. I hope that answered it. Anything else come up?
Anything else, you guys? Just a lot of thank yous. Thank yous.
I'm so honored to have been here. I have tons more material, happy to share it. So thanks for having me.
Thank you, Sari.
Sari, before we wrap up, would you be comfortable with us making the slide deck you had available to download to attendees?
Absolutely.
All right, awesome. So I'll send everybody an email that you'll get that in the follow-up with a link to download.
Yeah, absolutely. I also do a total training on how to recover from overwhelm, and especially during the pandemic. And so there's other things that we can also add on if there's interest, and certainly share the work, share the books. I have a lot available to help people, and I get a lot of feedback that it really makes a difference, and I wish for you all to have all the support you need right now. So thanks for having me.